Automation, dodge the dangers of unsigned PowerShell. Discussing today's topic is Jason Kikta, CISO and Senior Vice President of Product at Automox. He's joined by his colleague Tom Boyer, Director of Security at Automox.
Thanks so much, Terry. Really appreciate it, and we're very excited to be here today. So, Tom and I want to talk about unsigned PowerShell and really more importantly, PowerShell signing and why it's important and what it can do for you. So we're going to start off with just a brief agenda here. So we'll begin. We already did the introductions. We're going to walk you through the historical dangers that have been seen with unsigned PowerShell scripts and how we're addressing those concerns, and then how you can leverage those signed scripts in your enterprise or organization. So first off, let's talk about PowerShell. Microsoft introduced it back in 2005. It's the scripting language that was meant to be either run from the command line, and at first a lot of it was just people would sit there and just bang it out on a keyboard from the command line. And then, you can also write it in a text file and then give it a .ps1 extension and run it. But it was, designed for system administrators to, give them more sophisticated tooling at the command line than had previously been available, right? And this was really about, if you think back to 2005, this was really about competing with Linux because it had, that Unix POSIX style of you could do whatever you wanted in Bash. You could script things out and really completely orchestrate the system from the command line or from a shell script. And Windows had no comparable concept. And I would say Microsoft, in many ways, not only accepted that, but embraced it, right? PowerShell rapidly grew in terms of capability to be able to not only control the OS, but be able to control a lot of the applications, especially Microsoft applications installed. So, it gave you things like enabling task automation, making that data accessible, and being able to pipe it between applications. You could do configuration with machine as code, and you could do it remotely, right? So back then, the majority of Microsoft users were running on-prem Active Directory. And so you could use a global policy object, push that out to all the machines, and all was well, right? No downside here whatsoever. And then some things changed, and I'll let Tom lead off on the next slide here.
Yeah, and I think in my mind, right, when you think about the change in PowerShell, to me it really kind of started with like trolling, right? And I specifically remember growing up, and most people used Windows when I was kind of coming up in the IT space, right? And one of my favorite kind of jokes, and I think everyone really played it, was like passing around PowerShell that would like open and close your CD-ROM drive, right? And to me, in my mind, I feel like that was kind of the first real like abuse mechanism that I saw, coming up in the IT space, right? All the way back in the day, 2005, 2006, and it's slowly been growing since then. And going from that till now, there's just been this large influx in almost this idea around like living off the land, right? Where threat actors, instead of building custom malware or spending time repurposing malware they find on GitHub, they can just live off the land, use PowerShell because it's already there, it's easy to use, there's examples all over the internet, right? And why recreate the wheel? And I think part of this is why PowerShell signing is so important, and helps kind of curtail some of the abuses we've seen in the industry going forward. And I don't know if you had anything else to add, Jason.
Yeah, you know, I think one of my all-time favorites was, I can't recall, I should say, how many variations I've seen of Rick rolls done through PowerShells a long, long time ago, and somewhere along the way, it went from like haha funny to, oh my God, this is one of the biggest security risks out there, and it turns out it's extremely hard to detect. And it's ironic because on the surface, PowerShell detecting threats in PowerShell seems like it ought to be a pretty straightforward thing to do because it's a script, right? It's not a compiled program, so all of the commands are right there. They're loaded into memory, right? Like there's no decompiling, so it ought to be very straightforward. But the you know the the rub was that because it is so flexible and has so many possibilities, it turns out it's actually quite easy to obfuscate what you're doing in a number of different ways. And I'd say the first one is it used to be rather challenging to load exploitation code in memory only. And that was very desirable for threat actors because the majority of antivirus solutions and even a lot of EDRs later on for a very long time did not scan memory. There's still a few today that barely scan memory. And when you're dealing with an executable program, a program that you've written in C or Go or Rust or even Python, in some cases, and you compile that, then you have to have a mechanism to get it into memory. So you have to use something like process hollowing, where you're taking an already running program and inducing it to load your code instead. And you have to do that all in memory and not let it touch disk. And that can be very painful. But with PowerShell, the mechanisms to load it directly into memory were already there because you could type it out at the command line. So that already had these built-in mechanisms to get you around most of the primary detection methods that security teams used and go straight into memory, never touch a disk, therefore never get checked or evaluated for malicious behavior. And then it evolved into techniques like encoding and encoding PowerShell, especially the malicious bits with base 64 encoding was remarkably successful for decade plus, and we're not talking encrypting, right? It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't like people didn't know immediately how to decode base 64 and turn it right back into plain text, but it was just astounding how long that method persisted and was very successful. And then of course you do have encryption as well, and the irony is it's like, okay, if it's encrypted, it has to be able to decrypt it. So oftentimes it's right there, the key's right there in the script, and it gets decrypted and it runs, and it again, like, you're not missing the key is often there, it's often built in. But even adding that, if the program that's evaluating this for maliciousness, of the AV program or EDR program that's evaluating this doesn't understand how to use that key to decode it, it's just going to look like gibberish, and it's going to not realize what's going on. So this became a huge game of cat and mouse, and as Tom alluded to, living off the land has grown in importance for threat actors and danger for IT and security professionals over the last 15 years. It's been on a steady trend upwards, especially over the last decade, where custom malware kits are expensive, they're time consuming, and it turns out that most of the time the system you're attacking already has the tools you need in order to do what it is that you need to do. And so being able to live off the land and use system organic things to reach your goals is very important. And I would have bet you 10 years ago, when we first started seeing really regular use of living off the land by state and criminal actors, that it would have curtailed by now in 2023, and it has actually grown. NSA, CISA, they've all put out advisories over the last several months, again, reiterating how much living off the land has proliferated, and there is no single biggest threat beyond PowerShell. It remains number one. And, being able to detect it or impede it is really, really critical. So,
Jason, let me interrupt just for a second. I mean, you're really helping us understand why PowerShell is such a popular attack platform. Are there other features to it that also make it inadvertently vulnerable in the ways you're describing?
So when Microsoft set out to build PowerShell, as I alluded to previously, they felt that sharp competition from Linux and all the flexibility that you could do with Bash. And so there was this drive to not only reach feature parity, but exceed it. And so that was part of it, of it could really do things in many ways that were above and beyond what other scripting languages could do. And so that led to a lot of potential for abuse, because it wasn't just about configuring the base settings on the system, but being able to do that data accessibility in just really new and unprecedented ways that, it was just it's so flexible, so if you think about even one action that an actor might take, enumerating the files on the hard drive, give me all the files in this directory. There are dozens of ways to accomplish that task, maybe more. Sending data to another system. I'm going to steal your data. I'm going to exfiltrate it. I'm going to push it out somewhere else to a server that I own outside your network. Hundreds of ways to do that, and hundreds of ways to obfuscate and make it difficult to detect that data theft, because the program is just so flexible, or the scripting language is just so flexible, and it's really, really hard to see what's going on and what's going to happen when a particular block of code is executed. Because, just writing it in a complex way, if you look on the slide there, even putting in the little carrots, the little up arrow looking thing in between characters is enough, and was enough for a very long time to throw off a lot of detection mechanisms. So it could be that simple. And, if you can get away with doing it that simply, you can imagine what it's like when they decide to get complex on you and do something really smart and unconventional.
I will say,
how
just
can
to add,
organizations start to reduce the risks that are associated with PowerShell?
What starts to reduce the risks?
How can our audience and organizations in general begin to reduce the risks that are associated with PowerShell?
So we're gonna talk about that in an upcoming slide, because this is where Microsoft built something really powerful into the operating system, a very powerful ability to digitally sign these scripts, so that you could have assurance of not only the validity of the script, but that you could block anything that was not signed, that you didn't sign. Where they fell short was making this method feasible and accessible to system admins out there. It actually is rather onerous to do on your own. I've seen a lot of places who tried it. I was at Cyber Command when we tried it in DoD, and it was an abysmal failure because the mechanism was just a little too esoteric for everyone to use day to day. Tom, you had something you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, when we were talking about why PowerShell is so popular, is because it's free as well, right? It's free. It's already on the system. And
Price is right.
Right. Everyone has constrained budgets, right? And why not use something free? And then, to kind of piggyback on Jason's point around, other things you can do, right? Something that I haven't seen well adopted I think industry wide is just script block logging, right? There is a mechanism within Windows right now where you can turn on what was run via PowerShell, like the entire script. And obviously that goes into your logs. And I think a lot of the resistance that I've seen, at least the people I talk to in the industry, is like that, goes from just a single entry in the log file to like 10, 20x because it's dumping the entire log into your SIM or whatever mechanism you're using for logging, right? But that data is so valuable to us responding to events and responding to incidents if a breach does happen in your organization, right? Like knowing what was run, even if it's obfuscated, even if it's 5 or 6 scripts back to back, that allows you to piece it together much quicker than just saying like X script was ran without any context. So if you do have the capacity within your SIM for more data, or maybe you have budget to pay some of these providers more money, like script block logging is something that is so valuable when an event happens that I recommend it to everyone. Turn it on immediately.
Absolutely. And James Hamill brought up in the comments from CGI Federal that it runs on Linux as well, right? Like PowerShell is a Windows native scripting language, but there are interpreters for Linux. You can run it even in standalone Linux, let alone WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, where you can load Linux inside of Windows. So it's very prevalent. It's very popular. You can find it in a lot of unexpected places. So these are the stakes, and this is what I say what I mean when I say that the risk is extraordinarily high. VMware did a study that 45% of attacks were due to exploited PowerShell scripts, either a malicious script getting in, they were able to inject it into the system and that enabled the rest of their attack chain, or they were able to take an existing script that was already staged, set to be pushed out, set to be executed at a certain time, and manipulated the contents to, go from, benign and expected to their malicious ends. And then BlackFog put out a statistic back in May of this year that 76% of ransomware incidents in April 2023 used PowerShell, right? Like that's powerful. That's huge. This is not, one out of many tools out there. This is the cornerstone of so many things. And there's entire, attacker toolkits ostensibly designed for red team. I mean, some straight up are really intended to be red team tools. There's some like PowerShell Empire that have sort of lost their way, but there's entire toolkits designed to help someone not only leverage PowerShell as part of an attack, but to write it in a really obfuscated way, make it non-obvious what it's doing, make it look benign when it's not. So that improvement in tooling has gotten us to a place where it reduces the overhead and time for the attacker, but it has the inverse effect on the IT system owners and the security personnel, because now the breadth and variety of PowerShell attacks has just grown massively, because it's not even dependent on the imagination of the attacker. They can use some wonderful toolkit to help generate it for them.
Yeah, and I will say, one of my favorite, I guess, experiments lately that I've been doing with like ChatGPT and other large language models is obfuscating like Bash and PowerShell. And it's just so easy to take a script and, just obfuscate it into something that doesn't make sense to someone reading it now, even more so than before, right? Like I don't even need to rely on exploit kits on GitHub that, most people are watching and a lot of people are detecting. I can just write something, throw it in an LLM, and it could obfuscate it in a way that it's not going to be detected by anybody, right? And I think just as defenders, just being aware of that kind of stuff, and not to harp on script block logging again, but just having that data is so valuable. in your Windows environments.
So what are some ways to ensure that critical endpoint management tasks are secured? You've painted a pretty dire picture here.
So the primary mechanism is enforcing script signing. There's a variety of techniques. You can log the results of any PowerShell. You can reduce the number of users who are authorized to run PowerShell. So normal unprivileged users can't run it. Only admins or administrative processes can run it. You can look at the origin of the script, the so-called mark of the web, to see, was this something downloaded or was it generated in the system? But there are really good, those are fantastic speed bumps, but there's ways around all of those, right? Okay, maybe the user can't run it, but perhaps I can induce this system process to run it, or I can, just compromise an admin account, or just insert it in a place where I know the system's gonna look at it. I can take things like, from mark of the web, like if you just download it straight and run it, yes, that'll stop it. But what if I go and put it inside? A popular one for a long time was putting it inside a zip file, and then that turned into the non-traditional things like CDs, the CD ISO format, right? There was an ISO format for CD-ROMs that could be expressed as a file, and Windows would happily open it up and mount it as a drive and let you run it inside. And it would honor, for the longest time until a few months ago, it would honor whatever the origin of the files inside said they were. So if they said that they were local from your system, it would just believe it blindly and let it run. So the number one mechanism to stop this, that's extremely difficult for any actor to overcome, if not impossible, is digitally signing PowerShell scripts, because that makes it so that now there's digital proof. If they manipulate even one character, the signature won't validate. That is a cryptographic signature that you can't really forge. And as long as you protect that private certificate well, and you're signing everything and enforcing signing on all your systems, you'll be able to stop this dead in its tracks. It loses all feasibility immediately. So that setting's been built into Windows for years now, and it's available, but the majority of folks in the world have it turned off because they either have no mechanism to sign it, or they don't have any centralized way to sign it and control the keys and push those public certificates out to each endpoint system. So because that public certificate, the safe one, has to be on every endpoint upon which that PowerShell is going to be executed, you have to keep that private key in reserve and then digitally sign each script as you write it with that private key, without letting it be out in the open. And so that's a heavy lift, which is why we decided to automate it all in Automox, which we're going to talk about more here in a minute.
Sure. I don't want to jump ahead, but can you address in general how Automox is helping to reduce these risks that are associated with PowerShell?
Yeah. So, we have built this out in many phases. Actually, can we do the poll real quick, Terry, and then
sure. Yeah, let's jump ahead to our first
that
poll.
lays it out pretty well.
Good. Let's go to the poll then. So we're putting to our audience, how confident in your organization's ability are you to implement script signing? How confident are you in your organization's ability to implement script signing? No problem. We can crush this. Between our CISO and the analysts we have on retainer, we'll figure it out. I'm worried about our ability to pull this off, and I'm not alone. Zero trust was hard enough, and now this. Last answer, no confidence at all. Jason, Tom, if you were betting men, what do you imagine the leading answer is likely to be?
I'm betting we're going to be down in the D&E range, simply
Tom, what
because
about you?
I've seen
Yeah,
so much
same.
optimism over the years and just never get there.
Yeah, likewise. D&E. I mean, I think honestly, if most organizations like dedicated the time, like a year, to make this their reality, right? I think they could probably get it done. But I think you'll notice though, like it's not a very well adopted thing in the industry. So, you know, there's probably tools that you're using that are running PowerShell and it's all unsigned, and you won't necessarily know that until you turn it on and stuff stops working, right? The screen test. And I think that's kind of what keeps people away so much, is that it's just no one wants to invest their vendor or organizations. So it's just a difficult thing to do, right? Because it's a whole PKI system you have to manage. It's a lot of unknowns, and a lot of routines are not established around this in internal IT departments, right?
Yeah, I think that's what makes it. I mean, this seems on the surface like a no-brainer. Massive threat, straightforward solution that you've already purchased and is built in. Why not do it? And then people start generating the certificates, and now it's, oh well, all the admins have to have the certificate. And what happens when someone leaves? And now do we have to rotate all those certificates? And now we need to re-sign every script in our network. And what about this group over here? And what about this? And so even just controlling the keys is hard enough. And then, you have to have exactly the right syntax to get that thing signed and be sure it's going to execute. And it's just on and on and on it goes, where, it's just really, really challenging. And most places don't have, as Tom pointed out, they could do it if they could devote, a significant amount of resources and a lot of time and patience. But that's just not feasible or realistic for the vast majority of organizations out there.
All right. Well, let's reveal the results here. Kind of splitting the difference, aren't we?
Yeah.
But clearly, a lot of confidence in the people in charge to make sure that this works properly.
Yep. A lot of optimism there. And again, I think that's fair, because it is something that, you could potentially do on your own, but at what cost and how long, and, how much pain and heartache. I've seen places, like I said, I saw DoD try to do it with NSA assistance and very specific direct guidance, and it just kept falling over. So, it's one of those things that I truly never believed how hard it was until, I tried it a few times myself and just saw just what a nightmare it was as we moved along. So this is where we want to really address what you brought up, Terry, right? Like, okay, big mess, very challenging on the particulars to fix it. How are we helping make this better? So, we looked at PowerShell writ large, and we came up with this sort of 3-phase plan of, how can we make it more accessible and then make it safe? So we wrote a worklet catalog that has hundreds. I want to say it was 350, 375 worklets last time I looked, and that was a month ago. So they might even be up over 400 now. But we have this massive catalog that we've built of pre-built PowerShell scripts and Bash scripts for our customers to run. And so that's there. We write them, we quality control them, we security review them. They're there and they're available. And so those can either be run directly, or you can take them and adapt them to your needs. If you say, that's mostly what I need, but not quite, I'm going to, riff off of that and build something new. It's there and it's available, and it's free to use within the product. The next phase was bringing in a large language model and then conditioning it It turns out, like hooking up the large language model, that was the easy part, but then conditioning it to give really good purpose suited responses of, hey, I need to generate a PowerShell script that does this thing, ask Otto, please help me. And right there inside the console, it'll provide you with something. I would be remiss as a paranoid CISO if I didn't say, I wouldn't recommend running it as is. It should always have human review. But if you have, more junior personnel on staff who, aren't as familiar with PowerShell or need to do an operation that they've never tried before and just need that little assist to get some hints in the right direction, or if you're a seasoned old salt graybeard like Tom, and PowerShell like the back of your hand, but you're busy and you want to save some time and have it generated mostly the way you want it, and then you can just adjust it as you go through it. Like either way, it's there. And then the most important part is the worklet signing. So we generate the public-private key pair for you. We keep the private key in escrow, so anyone designated in your organization that you say this person's allowed to generate and run PowerShell, they can write their PowerShell, have it signed by that private key. They never need to touch it. They never actually have access or control of it. We sign it on their behalf. And then we also push the public certificate down to each one of your AutoMox managed endpoints. So it's out there. They have them so that when you turn on the key signing for Windows and you say, hey, on Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows Server, all of you enforce key signing, it has that certificate pre-installed. Anything signed and validated against that certificate will be allowed to run, and everything you generate from there on out will be signed by that, right? And so that just makes it just really, really easy, right? You don't have to manage, as Tom pointed out, you don't have to manage the PKI portion of it with the certificates. You don't have to actually do the signing, and we've handled the key distribution for you as well. So it just makes it very straightforward and simple to use right there inside the console.
And is that Worklets catalog available to everyone?
It's available to every AutoMox customer. And if you look on our website, we have a link to it that has, gives the titles. We don't want to give away the content, but you can look through that catalog and see what's in there. It usually lags production by a few weeks. So you probably see a little less than whatever number I rattled off, but that's just a factor of how we updated the website, but the catalog is live and in the actual AutoMox console. And so every time we add something, you see it within seconds.
Yeah. And I will say something unique to AutoMox is we are members of MAP, so Microsoft Active Protections Program. And, the Thursday, usually before Patch Tuesday, we get together as a team and we go through the notes and we say, okay, which one of these can we address with a worklet? And, those mitigations I think are extremely valuable because a lot of the times you can't update your OS. And a lot of times those, Microsoft provides good mitigations, and, we try to provide those to our customers as soon as we can. And I think it's been very successful for us, at least internally, a lot of times when we can't update some of our systems. So, those are in the catalog as well.
Yep.
And I can answer Steven's question in the chat. Just my analysis on AI written PowerShell, I think it falls into kind of two camps, right? There's those of us that are, very familiar with PowerShell, and we can, kind of prompt engineer our way to exactly what we want from the script. And, to me, that's hugely valuable, right? Because I can just save so much time having an LLM write the script. But, on the flip side to that, and, this kind of has always existed in the space, is those newer to Bash or PowerShell or Python, right? Sometimes they just pull things off the internet and run it blindly. And, LLMs make that very easy, right? As before you were pulling things off Stack or, some random form and you're running it on your endpoints. with, you know, ChatGPT, it gives you a very confident answer. And, you know, what I've seen is people kind of take that and, you know, they're confident to run it. And, you know, sometimes it can turn out bad, but I think it's just another avenue of, you know, educating your team, educating you know, your administrators around, like, you know, maybe not run this directly in prod. Maybe we should take it for a test run first and run it by someone a little more senior. But, you know, I think it really does level up the team if you can get it.
Looks like he may have had a follow-up there. Can't you bypass signing?
Oh yeah,
Tom,
from
Jason?
James.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question, and it's true and it's false. So there are actually two primary settings in Windows for relative to signing, and one is checking the digital signatures, and the other one is enforcing. And so I think there's been some confusion in the industry around people will enable checking, and so it will run and it will log as saying, yes, I validated that this has a valid signature, you know, before running it. And that is a security setting, I would say, you know, ballpark, probably like 30% of the industry maybe has turned on. It's a significantly larger number than zero, but it's by no means the majority. And that's a good thing to do because, you know, if it has a digital signature on it, you should at least check it, but it doesn't enforce it. And so unsigned PowerShell is still allowed to execute. And so it's that second one of you know, I forget the exact terminology, but it's basically like don't permit unsigned or something. And so once you enable that, then the only PowerShell that will be allowed to run regardless of source is one that passes the validation check of the signature. So that one cannot be bypassed, you know, unless there is, you know, a bug, a defect in the operating system that, you know, you can, you know, hey, if you run it this way, exploit those things, you know, likely come up from time to time. I don't recall of one in recent history, but, you know, it's not outside of the realm of the possible. But the point being that they're rare, uncommon, and usually rapidly fixed. And then the other method to bypass it would be that you would have to compromise that private certificate. So again, that's where our approach to help our customers really adds value of you don't have to retain that and distribute it among your IT staff. We hold it in escrow for you in a high security machine, and we're the only ones who can get a hold of it. Really, we can't even get a hold of it. We can get a hold of it on your behalf, but you know, we can send a script in to sign and send it back out again, but we couldn't even pull the key out of there if we wanted to. So that's the difference in approach. And that's, you know, it's, and we have that all in our setup instructions to say, you know, hey, it has to be this setting precisely, or you won't actually get the protection you think you do. But yeah, that's a really critical distinction.
Jason, do you want to close us out with workload signing? Did we get to that one?
We did. So I think we're ready for the next poll now.
Excellent. So we want to ask our audience, have you ever worked with signed scripts before? It's a pretty, what I'll just call an advanced binary. Yes, no, a little. Asking for our audience just to weigh in with their particular experience with signed scripts. Jason and Tom did okay on the last poll. What's your sense of where this one will land?
I would guess a little bit or not at all, because unless you're enforcing script signing, and again, you know, study after study have shown that, and even Microsoft's own telemetry has shown that it's just not very many organizations are running it. It's not been super popular, not because it isn't valuable, but because the implementation is challenging. That, you know, if you're not enforcing, then there's really little reason to sign. And I'm guessing that most folks are not. They've either never tried it or they've tried it once or twice, and then that was kind of it, because there's just not a reason to do it on a regular basis without that.
And I'd probably agree with Jason's take. Probably most people are around B or C. Maybe a few sprinkled here and there in the enterprise that have worked with it before. I imagine there's some high sensitivity machines that probably have, the execution policy set to all signed,
yep.
Where, maybe on the endpoint or in the server space, you're running all signed, right? Because you're not
yep.
interacting with the users, right?
It's a smaller admin
IT
team.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
easier to debug.
Let's
I
see
think
where
fleet-wide, probably B or C, yeah.
Let's see the results here. Skewed a little bit higher toward the experienced folks with signed scripts.
Wow,
Is
nice.
this surprising to you guys?
That's pretty surprising. But again, I would I think there's looking at the attendees list, that there's some folks at some pretty large well-resourced organizations, and as Tom pointed out, there's probably quite a few folks who they don't have it on for their entire enterprise, but they're running it for a particular segment, like the server segment or some other high security segment, where it was feasible to do there, but it wasn't feasible to do broadly.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to our audience. Before we push ahead, Jason, I'm wondering if we can just go back to this slide again, and if you can talk to us a bit about why someone would use Auto AI instead of just another AI technology for entering the script and creating customized worklets. Can you give us a little more insight there?
Yeah, so the nice thing about Auto AI is it helps you. It helps you in a number of ways, right? So first off, I spoke about the conditioning, where this isn't your generic off-the-shelf large language model that you find on the web. It is based on one of those, but we have preconditioning for the prompt that we're feeding to the LLM in the background. As we basically prepend it to your query to make sure that it understands, much better what sort of output we're looking for. I think the other advantage is, if you're doing something like, let's say you're working with secrets, right? You're writing a PowerShell script that's going to midway through call an API key, use a particular token, maybe even includes a password. I don't recommend it, but I know it happens. And the challenge that you have with just using something built into a web browser or available over the internet or in a phone app is that, great, like now that secret just became part of, the training model for that LLM. And so, we have very specific agreements in place with our LLM provider that whatever you input does not become part of their training data. So that privacy concern is another big one. And then I think the third piece of it is you get easy integration on the topic of secrets. Well, I would just say broadly, you get easy integration with the other AutoMox features, right? So you can use that Ask Auto generated script. We have a secure secrets storage service where you can, say, hey, here's my API key, here's my password, here's my sensitive thing that shouldn't be just plain text sitting in the script. You can put it in that, and then, put a token in there and have it incorporate that token. You can go right into getting the worklet signed right off of there. And so it's convenient, one-stop shopping, and more importantly, secure one-touch interface to move through all of those things and make sure that, hey, out the other side, I was able to generate quickly thanks to the catalog or Ask Auto. I was able to review it easily right there. It didn't get copy pasted around. It didn't get saved onto my local hard drive. I was able to securely store and handle and insert my secrets. And then I was able to get it signed and then, scheduled in a policy to run at a later date or run via fix now to immediately go down and be implemented on a given endpoint. So that's where it just really gives you it's the temptation is there to say, hey, like I'll just do it on the web, but you're really elevating your risk and adding extra steps to what is very, very straightforward. Okay, so these are the three major benefits of Cyan PowerShell. And I think that, obviously reducing your potential attack surface is the biggest one, right? We spent a lot of time talking about that, and that can't be understated that, when you reduce that attack surface, it by 3/4, it not only makes you demonstrably safer, but it lowers the noise floor so that your team can focus on so much more. Because if it's 76% of ransomware attacks have PowerShell in it, well, you're probably spending a significant amount of your security effort, maybe not 76%, but it's a significant amount, reviewing PowerShell, checking it, trying to catch malicious insertions, new PowerShell that is coming from unexpected sources. And now that security team can be freed up to look at new and different things. Again, that assurance of no malicious modifications is massive, because that's where people, as Tom and I like to joke, that's where people got, because they're looking, they tend to look for PowerShell coming from outside sources, coming from unexpected sources, and what they overlook is they'll see PowerShell execution logged, and oh no, hey, that's normal, right? That's the script that I wrote last week, and it's supposed to run in every endpoint, and it's fine. And based on the title of it, that is true. But what you don't know is that an attacker was able to gain access to where that was stored and change out or add in some bits in the middle that actually did a malicious act. And then the third one is, it's your strongest technical control for authorization. So, running PowerShell in production, on your network has a lot of danger to it. And so most IT organizations at a certain level of size and maturity will start to segment that to say, okay, the really junior folks can't run it unless it's been reviewed by a more senior person. And hey, these admins over here are only authorized to write and run PowerShell on user workstations, but this group over here is only authorized to run it on server workstations or servers, and never the two shall meet, so they have that sort of separation of duties. And so it's great to tell them that and to try and separate out the mechanisms, but it's rather hard from a technical perspective in most systems to be able to enforce that, and being able to control the digital signatures to say, here's the signatures that are going on the servers, here's the signatures that are going on the user endpoints. Now you have that assurance that, hey, only the people that are authorized to write and deploy are doing it, and they're only doing it on the systems for which they ought to be doing it, right? That is really fantastic assurance to have, and very hard to get otherwise. Tom, anything to add on this one?
Oh, I don't think so. I think you covered it really well, right? It really takes the administration burden out of running PKI and keeping the CA private key secure and all those kind of things, right? It just abstracts it all out to us. That I think that's a good benefit.
Yep. All right. So again, this is these are our goals, right? Slashing complexity, helping you fix it fast, and winning your time back, because it's the only thing they're not making more of. Volcanoes can always, I always heard that joke about real estate, but volcanoes can always make more real estate, but there's definitely no more time. We only get the time that we have. So any bit of that we can allow folks to claw back is really important. So I think we're ready for audience questions.
Well, that's great, guys. Thank you for that perspective on some of the lesser understood issues associated with unsigned PowerShell. Thank you both. An issue, I think it's on everybody's mind, whether they're a CISO or a SOC professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge is, I'd say it's twofold. One is having assurance that what you intend for that automation is actually going to occur, and getting that the sort of feedback loop of like, I want to do this thing, I have this thing, is it going to run on the machines I want at the time I want, and am I going to get feedback to tell me that that is indeed what happened, or if something went wrong, at least enough that I can troubleshoot and find it. So that's always a challenge, and that's something before I came to Automox that I struggled with quite a bit. It was really ate up a shocking amount of time. I think the other one is being able to have your staff write effective automations, and that's another one where you can begin to take that one for granted, where you have a fairly senior staff. They've been there a while. Everyone's, working together, and they are, you have probably several members of your team who are very good at it and can just churn those things out. But then, somebody leaves, somebody retires, they move on, and now you're bringing in more junior staff, and that thing that you took for granted, that they're able to do it quickly and effectively, really goes out the window. And I'd say even if they are pretty effective at it, depending on their tooling, they might not be as quick about it as you would hope, because it takes that long to articulate it to the system, and that just eats up part of their day. And so that's where I did IT for 20 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, and I run IT as well here at Automox. And the name of the game is you will always have more to do than you ever have resources to cover. And so you have to look for any kind of time advantage that you can, so that if you can automate away and take away the things that are tedious and time consuming for humans to do, like, think about how much more you'll get done with all that time that your staff is able to win back.
We have another question. Jason, I think this one is for you as well. Automox supports Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. What about third-party apps for patching?
We do, and it was funny because I was talking to someone yesterday, and I mistakenly gave the worklet number, and then they corrected me and said no, it's 500 third-party applications that we support across all 3 operating systems. And I was blown away, because I had not been paying attention to it for a while, and that number even shocked me, but it's true. That is not different versions of things, because I know that there's some vendors out there who would say, like, okay, it's Adobe Acrobat 9, and then I also support Adobe Acrobat 10. Like, yes, but we don't count those as 2 separate things. Like, it's just Adobe Acrobat. And so 500 applications, built-in third-party patching, cross-platform, like, that's massive, and that's something where I'm a big believer in it, because I've seen a lot of patch solutions over the years, and even if you get it tuned in and working the way you want, what eats up all of your time is all of those third-party things that have to do a la carte. So that's pretty huge for us.
Excellent. Tom, a question for you. Outside the time of management and administration, is self-signing a worse security option than using a PKI or an AI automated solution?
I think that depends on how you're managing the CA's private key, right? We pay vendors to kind of outsource that for us, right? And obviously there are other, like root certificates and a little bit more trust built into what we're used to, right? But, I think if you're running your own solution internally and you manage those private CA keys very, very well, then I believe it's still a pretty decent option, right? Because you're controlled, right? But then you get in the hiccups of like distributing keys and then like key revocation. And there's not a really good solution to revoke a key when you're using self-signing, right? I know like Vault and those other open source technologies, have tried to solve this, but I think you run into a lot of those long tail administration problems of, the guy that made the CA, he kept a copy of the private key on his laptop or he moved it to his local computer or something, and there's no easy way to revoke things. And, maybe you didn't do immediate certificates when you built out your internal CA. So you have all this debt that you have to deal with within CAs, and it becomes a nightmare to manage internally. But, on the flip side, it's free, right? It costs just staff to manage it. And, it's not worse for wear, right? But it really just depends on what you're willing to take on as an organization. But, just doing something is obviously better than doing nothing at all. So it gives you an opportunity as well to explore like command signing and PowerShell signing and all these other technologies that you might not get the chance to do without a big upfront investment, right? So there is opportunity there to kind of up level your team before you invest in like a big CA, thing or do something like that. So, my recommendation is give it a try, and if it works out and, meet your policies internally, then, I'm all for it. But if you start to run into issues or long tail, certificate problems, then it might be time to invest in kind of a, like a HSM or some other module to store your private keys.
Thanks, Tom. Jason, you're going to get the last word. One final question: should sign scripts be paired with heightened execution policies, or would this be redundant?
I would say no at first, yes eventually. And I think that you don't want two different things to debug, and so I think that if I had to pick between the two, and actually I have had to pick between the two, sign scripts hands down final answer. As if you have to find a place to start and you can do it, then start there. The heightened execution policies is never a bad idea to add on afterwards, simply because what you want to guard against and have that sort of redundancy is that if there is a mechanism to bypass the script signing, some exploit that comes out down the line, then you have that as sort of a backstop. So I would recommend it, but I'd say get script signing in place first and get comfortable with that before you move on and add in execution restrictions.